Okay, guys, really happy to have you here with us. We are here for another episode. Want to give you guys the heads up, though. We are still in the throes of quarantine, and that means that we are all remote. That means that even Ashlynn and I are in separate rooms of the house. Never can be too careful. Only kidding. Only kidding. Yeah, because we're going to be remote and we're going to be all in separate locations, we're not going to have the same quality audio that we normally like when we're in studio and have all the proper equipment. But hope that you can bear with us and roll with us. So hope you guys are safe. Hope that you guys are healthy and quarantining appropriately wherever you are. So best of luck. And with that, we're going to start. What is the missing link for men?
Okay, before we answer that, we got an awesome review last week. So it's a quick one, but it says, "I cannot tell you enough how grateful I am for you all. This program has helped me so much to get through my toughest times. I have an unfaithful wife justifying her behavior using God's name, which is pretty unique and tough to work through. Your podcast has brought so much understanding to me as I navigate these difficult times." So thank you for leaving a review, and whatever you're going through, however unique your situation is, we hope that we can be a source of light and hope and some knowledge there for you to navigate through these hard times. So thank you for leaving that review.
Absolutely. All right, you guys, we have a special treat with us today. We're introducing a new topic we haven't brought up on our podcast before, but it's one that we're excited to have. So we've invited an expert in this, and it's Shana James, and she for 15 years has been coaching more than 1,000 men and women, leaders, CEOs, authors, speakers, and those with big visions to find love, rekindle sparks, create a legacy, and become effective and impactful leaders and be personally inspired and fulfilled. She has a master's in psychology, a DISC certification, and more than a decade facilitating workshops, starting multiple businesses, and helping hundreds of entrepreneurs start their own, with as well as mindfulness, meditation, and communication training. She has a broad range of skills and supports in all different areas. So we're going to leave her information. She has her own podcast, her own website, and coaching, all in the show notes that you can find later. And we'll mention those at the end as a reminder, because I know you're going to love what she has to talk about today.
We hope so.
Let's go ahead and get started. We will. All right. Let's get started. I would love to hear just kind of where this started and what has a woman interested in masculinity.
Yeah, I mean, I could go all the way back to my relationship with my parents. And I think for now, I'll just go back to the mid-20s when I was in grad school to become a therapist. And I started doing some, programs, some coaching programs. And two of them, I was also in this intentional community where we, as I called us young, optimistic adults, we were attempting to be really honest and authentic and vulnerable with each other. We called it soul to soul. So it was like this idea that we would connect on a soul level and make a whole bunch of messes, but we wouldn't leave. And so, we were working with attraction and vulnerability and when we were upset with each other and actually talking about those things. And two of the men who were in that group were so, they were inspired and they felt stronger and they felt more able to connect and love and be loved. And so they started this program called the Authentic Man Program, and invited those of us as women to be coaches and to give this real-time, honest feedback. And, the idea was that we would bring it with love and care. And it radically changed my life in a way that, I really thought I was going to work with women, and I still do some, but I just had this wake up of like, oh my God, I'm starting to understand what it's like to be a man. I never claimed that I fully understand, right? But having seen so many men be vulnerable and open their hearts and cry and scream and fall apart, and it just changed me, and I felt so drawn to support men from then on, and that's what happened.
So Shana, that's really interesting to hear you say that. I think it speaks to the soul that's in you to see through all of the the exterior rubbish that can exist with men of all generations, of all backgrounds.
Yeah.
How did you sort through all of the noise to really get down to the core issues? I mean, that had to have been challenging at first. And how do you do that?
Yeah.
Still?
I mean, I always say I did a lot of my own work, and in my own coaching trainings, I mean, I made it a point to sit down with all of the men and say, like, this is what I'm seeing, and this is what I feel upset about, about how you're acting, and this is what I don't understand. And we got we just got to the root of where we were not connected or where we weren't understanding each other. And I really just started to see underneath, like you're saying, those masks or those facades or that sense of, distance or whatever can happen because of the culture that you guys as men have been taught. Like, this is what's good. This is what's manly. This is what's masculine. So, that, and then having thousands of men open up in front of me and just being unable after that really to deny that, we're all human, we're all vulnerable, no matter what's going on the surface. We've all got this deep well of pain and longing and, all of it.
Brannon, I'm sure you can relate to that.
Yeah.
That's what you do all day, right? It's like sort through all of the walls.
Well, I mean, what I work with men who are posers in so many ways. They've got their masks on, they manipulate and they lie. And from the outside, you can look at it and say, what's wrong with you? But when you look underneath, there's reasons why.
Yeah,
and
always.
When we talk about masculinity,
Mm-hmm.
What is masculinity?
Oh,
that's a big question. That's a huge question.
What's masculinity? My honest answer in this moment is I don't really know. I mean, I think that there are, I think we're taught what masculinity is and we're taught what femininity is, but I think that has many of us as human beings feel really boxed in. So, masculinity, I would say, is a structure or a form that a segment of our population is taught. This is how I'm supposed to be. And that masculinity, in our culture has been strong and, we don't cry. We don't show when something's going on that we're struggling with. I think that's the masculinity that many men have been taught that has really caused, like you're saying, the men you work with to do whatever they're going to do, even though underneath there's a ton of vulnerability happening there.
Yeah. I want to give you a scenario and just have you pick it apart a little bit, if you will.
Okay.
Because I work with betrayal, and mostly it's men who have betrayed their wives.
Yeah.
So what happens is they get caught, or it comes to light, and then a lot of times the men, the women kind of take on this role of policing their husbands.
Yeah.
And the men go into this role of compliance and trying to be good enough and trying to do the right things all the time.
To make up for what happened.
So
that's penance almost.
Yeah, they'll check in their phones at night, or they'll do these check-ins where they talk about all the, triggers they had throughout the day or whatever it is. They'll try to be good enough that way. And it never creates safety. It never creates passion and intimacy. It creates a breakdown in safety.
Yeah.
Because he's showing up so weak and just so unauthentic, right?
Yeah. So like, what's the word I'm looking for? Questioned, or just constantly, that sense of being watched and then
trying to prove himself.
Right. And then trying to prove himself, which that's one of the main things that I think, as I work with men to support them to let go of needing to prove or defend themselves. I think any gender, but there's a specific way that it shows up with men. But that's a different one, right? So when you have betrayed or created a scenario that breaks trust, I can imagine there's much more of a need to prove yourself. And yet if it's coming from that place of like, no, really, I'm good enough, or I'm this, or I'm that, or a place of losing touch with one's own, clarity of desire or vision or integrity, then it gets really messy in there.
Well, listen to what you just said. So losing one's like vision of clarity and integrity. How can you ever build trust and safety in a relationship if you don't have integrity, right? If you don't have that, yet they think they're being good men by being completely compliant,
right,
in this scenario. But I think that their masculinity is kind of not compromised. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, then to me, it's like, okay, so now if I imagine being one of those men, and you guys can of course speak to this too. It's like, then I'm trying to live up to someone else's expectation once again, which was probably a part of what created the scenario in the first place. Right. And so then without having that sense of, okay, I'm me over here, and here's what I'm struggling with, and here's what I want for us, and here's where I'm scared, and you're you over there, and we're going to connect about all these things. Then it's like, I don't know, I feel frozen when I imagine trying to be that man. And when I imagine trying to have a relationship, it's like, I already can't win, and I'm up against trying to prove something rather than here's what's really going on for me.
Okay. So,
go ahead, Coby.
Well, I just wanted to, like, so much of this is speaking to me, and what I wanted to represent was the idea that in my family of origin, my mom, 5'2", 110 pounds, redheaded. I was the second of 7 kids, the oldest boy, and I was the favorite because I was really, really good at posing, as what's already been mentioned.
Yeah.
But Ashlyn's laughing hysterically, but she really saw it. But the point is that as a young kid, I realized very quickly that meeting expectations and not making waves and not getting in trouble were 3 really paramount things. That
to be loved, or to be
loved, to have approval, to feel validated. And my mom was she also kept kids with special needs in the house. So she was like spread thin. She was intentionally running, subconsciously running, but like she was running from her own stuff. And she kept herself so busy that it was like she wore the firefighter hat. And if there wasn't a fire, then you weren't getting much by way of attention.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So I began to, again, learn kind of the street code of our house by not getting in trouble, by trying to anticipate compliance in some capacity, and then not making waves. And I honestly believe that, looking back as a kid, like Brannon, you talked about integrity a minute ago, I had no concept of what that was. I've said this many times on the podcast, that I had no concept of like honesty. I knew what honesty was, but like life for me was never about being honest. It was about not getting in trouble.
Right.
Okay. And so I'm just
bring that fast forward into your
exactly exactly in that. And I was very, very good at, creating expectations, living a poser's life, if you will.
Yeah.
But I really honestly didn't know who I was. And honestly, I can tell you this, as far as integrity is concerned, even in my early to mid 20s, I thought that was just some ancient characteristic that Stephen Covey talked about in one of his books. And I was like, oh yeah, I think old guys have that. That's in that book somewhere, I think, but I've got really no concept of what that is because I didn't know who I was. So I really lived my life based on trying to please the people who are around me. And it turns out I really sucked at that.
Oh. Well, in a way, thank God you sucked at that, right? Because then otherwise it's like, the way I see it is you're living somebody else's life in that. So, it's ultimately painful when that falls apart, obviously, but then you actually get to know who you are.
It was painful, not just for me, but it was also painful for Ashlynn.
For everybody.
So here's the question. Here's the question on that, Shana, is what are one of the hardest concepts of masculinity for a guy like myself to really grasp and own when I had real no identity of my own?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I'm supposed to be masculine. What are the challenges there? But let's just start first with what are the challenges there with someone like me really owning it?
Yeah. Well, and what even is it, right? Because
Like masculinity, right?
right, if I'm supposed to be this version of masculinity that I'm taught is what is a man, then it's still a layer away from who I am actually, right? So, I mean, when I work with men, it's really getting back to like, well, what do you want? What matters to you? You know, what do you value? Who's important to you, and how do you want to treat that person, and how do you want to be treated? And, you know, really finding a man's sense of who he is and what he wants, as opposed to this cultural norm of this is the overlay, this is who you're supposed to be, because it's, you know, that's what it sounds like you grew up with.
Yeah, that's like all those things. It's like, no. Like what you just said and like questions that you pose to guys. When I hear that, I just think, no. Just tell me what I got to do.
Right.
Right. It's like,
And that's where I'm like, nope, I'm not going to tell you. Like my dad actually often says, you know, what kind of advice do you give to men? And I'm like, I don't give advice to men. I help men or humans or whatever, you know, figure out what's true for you. What, you know, I believe that whatever you desire is actually good. It doesn't, you know, some of it's going to stay in the realm of fantasy. Some of it's going to stay in the realm of reality. And some people who you meet are going to, you know, jive with or have similar desires, and other people it's not going to be a fit. But I don't think that it's innately bad, you know, to actually know what you want.
So, Shana, I love what you're saying. So and let me kind of see if I can formulate this a little bit. Being a man is not having big muscles and driving a big truck and not being emotional and whatever.
Yeah.
But masculinity actually has everything to do with your ability to be confident in who you are and own who you are. And not, when I say confident, I don't mean arrogant. I don't mean, but like really confident and understanding of who you are, and be willing to kind of share that and put that out there to the world. Is that?
I mean, that's interesting. I look at confidence as more of an ability to kind of roll with whatever shows up than a sense of like, you know, in a sense of like, I've got this and I trust myself more than I'm supposed to show that I've got it. If that makes sense.
Wait, say that again.
Like I trust myself that whatever is going to show up, I can navigate, you know, I can stay connected, or I can work through this in a way that matches with my own integrity. Right. So we're going back to integrity versus like the confidence of I'm supposed to look like I've got it together. I can handle anything. You know, I am all powerful.
And I would definitely say the first one is what I'm talking about, when what the true essence of masculinity is the first one, not in any way faking it, faking that I got it all together.
Yeah, I guess it's funny. It's like, as you guys are talking, I'm like, do I even know what masculinity is? I mean, when I think about masculinity, it's like, I think of this kind of strength, but not a strength that's, again, proving or defending, but more of that belief in oneself or trust in oneself. And, you know, I think about the protector archetype, or like the kingly archetype, and someone who sees good and wants good for all, or someone who's out to take care of or provide in certain ways. I think that's the masculine archetype.
Yes.
Okay, so I love that, and it like fits recovery work in my opinion. When I hear you describe that man, I'm like, yeah, that's what I start to see in men who are really working to make change. So that's cool.
Yeah,
it's a good alignment. I have a question for you. Coming from the betrayed side, who are a lot of our listeners who may or may not want to listen to this episode. I know that we have some we have our own narratives about what masculinity looks like in a man. So is there like some common myths or what we kind of go into it thinking and then, wait, that's not what masculinity is, type of thing?
I mean, I think the common myth is that men are more distant, or that they, you know, they want to have power over, they want to dominate, they aren't emotionally available, they aren't able to connect. And what I've found over the years, and I have so much compassion. I've never had a kind of huge betrayal like that. I've had many betrayals, I think, because we all have, but what I've found over the years is that with all of the men who I've worked with, there is this, when there's a betrayal or when there's a pain created, there's a hurt that it comes from. And I remember the day in the Authentic Man program when they were like, well, we're going to have a bunch of guys from the pickup community come. And I was like, oh no, I can't stomach that. That just, makes my stomach turn. And then they came in and they sat across from us. And I just remember like breaking out in tears as I heard each of them talk about why they joined the pickup world. And that, the option was either like, well, we can learn to pick up women or we can go to therapy. And if we don't learn to pick up women, then we're going to be alone. And it's just not working. Like, I just really started to see that underneath everybody's facades and masks, we're all struggling with something. And so, I have so much compassion for anyone who's been betrayed and abused and all of that. And I don't make that right. But I have seen that when I get in there with men, there's tons of vulnerability underneath the surface, and a not being guided often. I think, Coby, you talked about that too. It's like, a lack of guidance of how to treat people or how to connect and how to ask the questions that have people feel understood. And, all of that has been relatively missing in most of our lives. I remember my sex education, the woman was like, well, I can't remember what her name was, but she was this older woman who wore tons of weird makeup. And I remember her just saying like, have a great weekend and use a condom. It was like there was no sense of how we're supposed to treat each other or why we would even want to be intimate. And so I just have a lot of compassion for the fact that most of us didn't get much education.
So, Shana, what are some speaking of that, right? I'm just kind of picking up on this. Like, what are some cultural stigmas or norms that have subverted masculinity?
Cultural stigmas that have subverted more of the healthy masculinity?
Yes. Sorry, masculinity in the healthy frame.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just the most common. I think that most of us are aware of the sports teams and that sense of like, go do it till you die, or I don't know. There's like all those sayings of man up and, crying is for pussies and wimps and like all of that stuff. It's so horrible what it seems like. Again, I'm not a man, so you guys can speak to this more too, but what it seems like it's done to all of the men I've worked with, and that vulnerability is then not, safe to actually show because I'm going to be rejected for it.
I think that we're supposed to be strong. And so instead of being vulnerable, we pose, we put on this facade to act strong.
I got it all together.
Yeah. And in reality, real strength comes through being able to be vulnerable and authentic.
Totally.
And so, yeah, I see that all day long with the men that I work with.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know why this is coming up in this moment, but so if you guys can take it in a different direction if you want to, but I think there's also, because of that, maybe this is why it's here, because of that sense of like, I've got to have it all together. What I've seen is that a lot of the men I've worked with miss being able to really attune to their partners and actually have a sense of like, oh, there's a subtle shift that just happened in her energy. Not that I need to fix it, or not that I need to, like, if I was a good man, I would, do something in this moment. But if I'm going to stay connected with my partner, I've got to be able to like see the weather as it passes and, be in the moment with each other and communicate about that. And when there's a sense of like, I got to have it all together and I've got to be strong, then there's no feeling one's own emotions and sensations in the body, and then no ability to actually feel what's happening in another person.
Oh my gosh, you just described like why so many couples that I work with don't have intimacy and connection. It's
Yeah.
they're triggered into their own shame,
Yeah.
and they're defending and they're trying to act strong enough rather than being there with their partner and having compassion and connection with them. So yes, all the time.
Yeah. And I'm just seeing recently, even in my own partnership, I've had a couple experiences, you know, being in quarantine where my partner and I don't live together. We live about an hour apart. And so we've been trying to figure out, like, are we going to see each other? Are we not? Is that putting our families in danger? And, you know, we actually finally saw each other yesterday and touched each other like for the first time in 6 weeks or something. And I started to cry. I was like, I feel terrified. I don't even know if I can let go right now. Like I'm supposed to be strong and I'm supposed to hold it together. And if I let go with you, I don't know if I'm going to be able to put it all back together. And it was like, it wasn't until I started to cry and felt that vulnerability that I actually felt my love for him.
Mm-hmm.
Like I knew I loved him, but I didn't feel it. And I just started feeling into how many men have told me, like, I don't know, I think I love her, but it's not coming from that feeling place. And I think if we're not actually touching into the tenderness and the vulnerability, we're not feeling anything. And so we're not feeling love. We're not feeling each other.
But if in that moment you're vulnerable and you're emotional and it triggers his shame and he's got to like worry about him, that it ruins that connection. But while you're being vulnerable and he can just be there with you, it creates that bond. It creates that connection.
Yeah.
So
that whole connection between masculinity and sensitivity without I'll speak just historically for myself. Like I'm a historically just like a really rad and innate fixer.
Wait, say that again.
I'm a really rad
fixer.
and fixer. Yeah.
Fixer.
Yeah. That's because, and Brannon explained this to me very aptly early in the podcast, that it was all a selfish thing because my tolerance for discomfort was like this.
Uh-huh.
And Ashlynn's, giggling, rightly so. But the balance of number one, being sensitive enough to not fix, and number two, being resilient to my shame enough, being shame resilient enough to not sink or drown in my own shame, so that I can focus on my partner. Those are two things that just totally overtook me. And Ashlynn, I want you to correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I was totally inept when it came to being there for you, not fix, but also just to be there and be unwavering for you, because I would drown in my own shame. Is that a fair statement from your perspective, Ashlynn?
Yes, and it did go both ways, I would say. It wasn't just Coby.
Yeah.
I was struggling in my own stuff, but for sure. And Coby is a very sensitive man compared to most. He cries on the podcast far more than I ever do. And so it was strange to see someone who was so sensitive, but not be sensitive in terms of me and our relationship. If that makes sense.
Right. And that proving, one of my favorite books is Undefended Love. And it's this whole idea of like, what if we weren't actually defending ourselves, or what are we trying to prove? And, I was thinking, as you just said about Coby being sensitive, it's like, I think the men I see who have the strongest masks or facades tend to be the ones who actually have been the most sensitive. And so it's, hard to contain that. And then we have to build these stronger walls, because if it comes out, then I'm not going to be manly. And so that whole layered experience seems to happen.
Yeah, that I totally resonate with that. I want to throw one other thing out here that was a really big obstacle to me being in like not being masculine, and that was being in victim mode. Right? I would drown in my own shame, think about how horrible I was. I'm not loved, I'm unwanted, I'm not worthy. And this has nothing to do with Ashlynn. This is all my stuff.
Yeah.
But victim mode, Brannon, I know that you see this loads, is like a huge thief of masculinity, because all of a sudden you see this, Ashlynn will just see this big blob of Coby on the floor, just in a puddle, in a pile, probably oftentimes smelling and stinking. But what would you say to that statement, Shana, about victim mode stifling masculinity?
Yeah. Well, and then there's a difference between like, are you in a puddle because you're actually feeling something, but not having the tools to know how to kind of feel it all the way through? Or is the puddle because of the feeling, the shame?
Yes.
Yes, all of it. I mean, one of the things I would say is, when I work with men, we do some role plays where I'm not pretending to be someone. Like I'm myself and I'm acting like me, but we're working with, what he says that has created shame, or what he says that he's been rejected for, and I'm giving my real-time experience. And part of that is because I see that those conversations can be so challenging to have, that if you've never had one of those conversations in a genuine way, to then go to your partner and try to bring it up, it's like sending someone to the Olympics, who's like just getting kindergarten education or something like that. So I don't know exactly what to say. I mean, the victim mode, one of the things I also try to do is really empower my clients to see, like, what was my role in this? Because even if you are letting someone attack you, or even if you're being, I want to make a disclaimer. Like, I'm not saying in the largest forms of abuse and where there's a huge power dynamic, but if someone's yelling at you and you're not saying, stop, I can't do this, I don't like this right now. This is outside of, like, there's financial dynamics and there's reasons that we need to stay with partners at times. But in these smaller situations of someone, of a client who was like, how do I get my wife to stop yelling at me? And I'm like, well, have you ever told her that you don't like it? Or have you ever said, I can't be here for this conversation anymore, So it happens both ways, gender, whatever the genders. But the empowerment piece and the not playing a victim is really important to actually see. Like, I think the only place we have power is to look at, what is my role in this and how am I co-creating this situation? Otherwise, I'm not free or empowered.
And Brannon, speak to this, if you will. What's the typical response you see from the betrayed when the addict or the indulgent says, okay, actually, this isn't working for me, I want to stop? The energy here, the flow, what do you typically see?
Well, so it's interesting because I'll give you an example. I was talking to a friend last week, and he's very, very much played the victim with his wife for years and years and years. And she's ready to leave him. And
how has he played the victim?
She'll have certain requests of him, and like, don't travel for work, and so he won't travel for work, and then blame her and wallow, and so he'd comply and then resent and resent.
Yeah.
And now he's kind of getting to this other place. He's swinging the pendulum to, you know what, screw you, just doing what I want to do, and which isn't strength either.
Right.
And I was trying to show him, like, look, show up in your truth, like, figure out what your truth is. And I feel like he's getting there, but they've been married for 20 years.
Right.
He's used to
water under the bridge.
Yeah, she's used to the yes man, the complier, so it's uncomfortable for her.
Yes.
She likes it. She likes that he's being more honest with her.
Yeah.
And she also is kind of terrified of it at the same time.
Totally. I could totally see that, because then what it kind of demands of her is a more of a letting go, or there's a softer side that comes out when he steps into more of his strength, and that can be
scary.
Really terrifying.
Just scary, but right there is where real amazing intimacy lies. Totally. Right, where the polarity of masculine and femininity come together, and it's what we all want. But
Yeah, I mean, I don't like to have it like, well, we all want the same thing, or we all want that same dynamic. Right. But, I think there are, and sometimes we want it to go back and forth. I think, Ashlynn, one of the things you were talking about before we started was, what I've seen in men, or the shifts that have happened, and that are vulnerable. And one of the men I was thinking of is a man who used to think, like, I have to lead all the time and I have to be strong because that's what men do. And to actually realize that he could surrender to his partner, whether it's sexually or whether it's just, in intimacy, parts of their lives where he could actually let go and relax and be held and supported, that's something that I do not see many men feel good about. And I think it robs you guys of, knowing that somebody has your back and that you can be in that role just as much as you can be in the leadership role. I think for women haven't seen men do that a lot. And so I think women get scared. Well, if I am holding my man, if he's vulnerable with me, he might never, lead or generate again. And what I've seen is the opposite, actually.
Interesting.
I'm sitting here thinking, okay, for the once betrayed who maybe have some thoughts in their head, okay, the men have been cheaters, they've been unfaithful, they're selfish, they're jerks. There are all these things that I think it almost like the lines get so blurred of what masculinity can look like that my guess is for those listening who might have some of those feelings, it might sound really scary to say, hey, step into your masculinity, because it could feel like a lot of maybe what's already happened. They've cheated on me because they did this, so how do you change and shift that to see what the good that can come that you guys were just talking about?
That's such a beautiful question. And I think that's part of why, as you guys have been asking me about masculinity, I'm like, I don't know, it's like, it's a ticking time bomb, right? Because it's like, oh, do I say to a man, hey, I want you to step into more of your masculinity? Or do I say, I want to know you, and I want to know what matters to you. I want to know what you feel good about yourself. I want to know what you want. Like, let's get to know each other beyond these ideas of what's masculine and what's feminine. And, and ultimately I want to know what you were needing such that you betrayed, or what wasn't here in our relationship. Like that, I think it's the hardest thing to do, is to really hear from the person who's caused pain. And, some of us maybe aren't ready to go there. And I think that's okay too. But when we do just start to get in there and understand, like, okay, who are you really? What are you wanting? To me, that matters way more than, I want you to step into your masculine, or it's more effective, I guess, than I want you to step into your masculine or some idea that I have of who we should each be.
Shana,
Shana,
are you saying that, if I'm really just trying to understand you, are you saying that rather than trying to focus on some point on the map that's, masculinityville, I just need to focus on being the authentic me
version of you? Yeah.
And
what would that be like? What would that be like, right? To let go of, like, oh, we have these categorizations of masculine. My mind is kind of like dissolving in this moment too. It's like, what if you could just be you and be loved for who you are? And there's going to be some strength in there, and there's going to be some, wounds and trying to figure yourself out. But what if it didn't have to be based in some idea of who you're supposed to be?
Can I go back to like the kind of what you're saying, Shana, and mix it with Ashlynn's question, which is, if somebody goes out and they cheat on their spouse, or they indulge in whatever to escape life, Ashlynn, you're saying, well, that could be scary for the betrayed, because, to be masculine means they're just going to go like cheat some more. Right.
Right.
Where what I'm hearing you say, Shana, is why not step into your vulnerability and your power, instead of kind of go off and get your needs met in a roundabout way.
Right.
Learn how to step into who you are and ask for your needs to be met, and be more honest. And
what if you're asking for, like, hey, I would love for you to be stronger, and then we could have a conversation. Okay, well, what does that look like? Because I don't want my strength to have to, be this one-dimensional thing. Right. So, right. But if we're asking for what we need, I think that goes a lot farther than some ideas and concepts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because I think of so many who are in my place of the once betrayed, and it's like, here's what I need from you. And they're going to give you this laundry list of do these things. And the man saying, okay, and just they're not being their authentic self because
Right.
maybe they don't agree to any of those things, right? And I think some of the best conversations Coby and I have had over the years are with his dumb little saying that he says with say more.
Say more.
Like, I
Yeah.
want to hear more about whatever this is and
Yep.
why. And it turns into, oh my gosh, like I had no idea that's where your head was at.
Yes. Right. That true intimacy.
And I think that's
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to know you for real, all of you.
mm-hmm.
And I think that's where we understand our partners. And I think that's where a relationship actually feels intimate, like you were saying before, and fulfilling, as opposed to like, oh, we're kind of separate beings here, you know, not really
living all these rules and
yeah, right. And that, right, if we replace the rules with that sense of, okay, we're going to get to know each other, and what if we're on the same team here, that I want you to be happy and you want me to be happy, and what would that take? And if there's something that it would take for you to be happy that I have a really hard time with or I don't want, then let's talk about that, because oftentimes there's something deeper underneath that surface desire that can actually be co-created together, rather than, you know, I remember a client who was like, I want my wife to wear lingerie more. And I was like, all right, well, let's understand that. Cause maybe it's just lingerie, but maybe it's that you're wanting some adventure. Maybe you're wanting this feeling of how it used to feel when you felt younger and more virile, or maybe, you know, there's so many different things that go on under the surface. And I think many couples don't actually get down to that level.
I love all that.
Coby, your saying is not dumb. It's a great little
no it's just it's
Just
so
kidding.
simple that
It's
people
so
don't
simple.
do it.
It's so
I could tell you didn't mean that it was dumb.
yeah, I'm just kidding.
No, we use it all the time.
It's like legit a go-to. And I think that, you know, that's an example of just a really easy canned statement that might sound canned, it might sound trite, rehearsed, but it has opened up doors
So much.
like Ashlynn's talked about in so many really, really important ways. So really, if we're talking about like shifts that people make or things that people can do on a daily basis to accept to be their authentic self, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we let go of femininity and masculinity, if we just say, okay, let's just move those to the side, really what we're talking about here, if I'm hearing you, is how does each person like start their day and have a few very simple things to be their most authentic self? What would some advice what advice would you have? Well,
I like getting in touch with each day, you know, what matters most to me today. And even asking that question a couple times, like, all right, you know, and what else? Kind of like you're saying, say more, or what else, but asking that question of ourselves, you know, and if there was something more important to me than that, what would it be? Okay. If there was something even more important, there's just that sense of, because you could say, my first thought was knowing what you want, but I think if we really get into the deeper layers of knowing what you want, it's based in what matters to me and what's important to me. So, you know, I like the idea of people having a time that they either meditate or journal or sit by themselves to really stay connected with that every day. Because a lot of clients who've come to me over the years, when I say, well, what do you really want? It's like, I don't know, or I think I might want this, or, you know, and there's so many expectations we're trying to live up to that's one of those ones that's really simple on the one hand, but so complex on the other.
and is there some, I'm probably Corona crying right now, or just feeling the swellings of that. Come on. But I really feel the frustration, and I can connect to it. Of really just not knowing.
Yeah.
Just not knowing what is it that I want and who am I?
Yeah.
Really, I can connect to that. And I know more now than who I was when Ashlynn and I got married 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But I still struggle with in some sense knowing who that is. Yeah. So I guess if I'm to ask this other question, Shana, to what's most important to me, could it be like what's most important to me as an individual, what's most important to me as a partner, what's most important to me as a professional,
Yeah,
what's most
totally. I
important
mean,
to
it
me
could
as
be,
a Corona survivor, like what?
yeah, on all those levels, right? I mean, and depending where you want to focus that day. And I mean, I just appreciate the vulnerability of,
So hard.
yeah, of that not knowing. And how could you, right? How could you if the way your family wasn't really set up for you to actually know deeply, this is who I am and this is what I want and this is what matters to me. And so there is a finding it, which can be exhilarating and also terrifying. And the other question that came up for me was like, well, what would I want if I wasn't trying to do this for others? What would I want if I wasn't taking care of others' feelings? Not that you shouldn't take care of Ashlynn's feelings on the one hand as a partner, but I think it's also important that we know, you know, everyone else aside, because I relate to like, I've disappeared my desires because in my family system, it was just way easier if I didn't have any, so everyone else aside, what would I really want? And then I can start to consider, okay, now there are other people in my life. So here's how I'm going to navigate or collaborate.
And doing that while, Brennan, like you talked about, not going to a place of independence where it's like, well, forget you, I'm going to go over and do this. It's like having to balance, independence and interdependence. And if we're speaking of, Melody Beatty language, so that way we're not throwing it in the face of our partners, which I've totally done. This is me. So just take it and
take it or leave it. Right.
Yeah,
that kind of, that's also that defensive posture. We can defend on either side.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Man, this has just been really thought-provoking for me. And I mean, I've said this many, many times, recovery has been multidimensional for me, but I think what has been right there with recovery is discovery of self. And it's a crazy place. So Shana, you've been really insightful. You've been very thought-provoking in all of this journey. There's loads more to this. Where can people find you? And, where do you live and show up on social media? And how can they not only find you, but what do you offer?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, you can find me in a bunch of places. I'm on Facebook as it's facebook.com/true success for men. My website is shanajamescoaching.com. I did a TED Talk recently that was what 1,000 men's tears reveal about the crisis between men and women. And yeah, I do coaching and group programs and, really support men, mostly men these days. I work with women as well, but, mostly I'm working with men who either are single and want to be in a relationship, and for some reason it's not working, even though often there's a lot of success in other areas of their lives, or men who are in relationships and for some reason, the spark has faded, or they're just feeling, like unsure of why am I even doing this anymore? That sense of, oh, we're just roommates rather than partners, or I chose this 20 years ago, but I'm kind of just floating along in it now. So anywhere where there's relationship struggles, and that tends to lead, we also end up working with career and leadership and all of that. But usually men come to me for relationships first.
And how would you advocate to a partner who is trying to be convinced, hey, listen, I want to go take this course, or I want to
work with this
group.
woman,
Exactly. Exactly. On masculinity. What would your advice, what would you share with them? Why?
Well, I'd probably send them to my website so they can see that, I am an ally for both men and women. But I would say also that I want to learn to love better. I want to learn to be in relationship better. And Shana gives me, helps me practice and helps me understand myself so that I can actually come to you with more of a sense of who I am and how we can collaborate and be on the same team together, instead of whatever patterns and habits I've been bringing that have kept us more distant.
Love it. Well, really appreciate you just being a part of this. Ashlynn, Brannon, any other thoughts you wanted to touch on?
Just wanted to say thank you, Shana. I really appreciate you coming on, and I'm really interested to just go consume your podcast. So I'll subscribe today and
Thank
start
you.
listening. So
Thank you. Yeah, I feel really grateful for you guys, and I love the combination of all three of you. You know, the expert and the betrayed. And are you, Coby, was it the addicted?
Yes,
Yeah.
I like to add a caveat to that as, what do we call it? The once?
The once addicted.
The once addicted. Yeah, I appreciate the vulnerability of all of the positions and how you're all very willing to be human and share about your own experience, as well as you know, who you're standing for in a way. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
welcome.
Guys, thanks for being here. We have loved having you be part of this. So if you haven't yet, jump over, leave us a review, rate us. Love to have that. And we will post Shana's information in the show notes. You can find her there. Just appreciate you guys being here. Again, remember, stay safe, stay quarantined to whatever degree that's required of you wherever you are, and be healthy. Thanks, guys.
You.
Thank you.